Morning, glory, and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome aboard. We have a lot of Wednesday program coming up for you. Victor Davis Hanson will be along in hour number 2, as will Senator Cornyn. Lots going on. But I begin today's program with the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr. Mr. Chairman, welcome back. Good to talk to you. A lot has happened since the last time we chatted and before. But before we get into the Kimmel wars, I was really hoping you could center the audience on the difference between licensed broadcasters, of which I am one. We're on 400-odd licensed stations, both on radio and television right now, and unlicensed broadcasters, and how the world is different for both of them.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Great to join with you, Hugh, and always appreciate your perspective on these issues. And you're right. Broadcast TV and broadcast radio are fundamentally different than any other form of communication. So you have cable channels, you've got podcasts, you've got streaming services, you've got the man on the soapbox on the street. In all those circumstances, there's really sort of an uninhibited right to say and do whatever you want. But broadcast TV is different. And this goes back to the Communications Act of 1934, where Congress decided to give broadcasters originally valuable spectrum, a public resource, for free. But they did so in exchange for one thing, which is that broadcasters operate in the public interest, not in a narrow interest. And again, because we're giving a monopoly to one entity on these particular airwaves. And so what the federal government expects is that you look out for not just your own partisan or narrow interest, but you're looking out for the broader public interest of the community. And over the years, the FCC has stepped away from enforcing that public interest mandate. And I think that's been a mistake. And one of the things that I've said from day one is we're going to start enforcing it. If you want to say whatever you want and do whatever you want without constraint, that's fabulous. Do it on a cable show, do it on a podcast. But if you want to keep using the scarce public resource of the licensed airwaves, then you got to comply with the terms of that license.
Now, Chairman Carr, I'm a First Amendment absolutist, as I imagine you are as well. When the government is involved, they may not do viewpoint non-neutral things. They cannot do content non-neutral things. But they can regulate a scarce resource, just like they regulate water and land that belongs to the public. So the spectrum really belongs to the public, and you can regulate it. How do you propose to develop public interest criteria beyond the ones that I've got muscle memory for, right? I got a dump button here in the event a caller uses one of the 7 deadly words. I don't want the fines. I don't want the proceedings. But how do you develop a framework that alerts people to what the public interest is?
Yeah, there's a couple bright lines that are easy, like you indicated. There's the, George Carlin's 7 dirty words. People of my age will remember the famous Janet Jackson Super Bowl halftime where there was indecency issue. So there's, bright lines like that that everybody understands that you can't do on broadcast TV or radio that you could do on a different medium. But the core of the public interest standard is looking out for the needs and serving the needs of your local community. And what's happened is, again, if you step back, the way to think about broadcasts is think about 2 different buckets. On the one hand, you've got these national programmers. That's like Disney, ABC, Comcast, NBC, Paramount, CBS. They create the primetime TV and in some cases radio shows that people are familiar with, whether it's 60 Minutes or NFL football. They're not licensed by the FCC. They have no public interest obligation. They can say and do whatever they want in that capacity. But that programming is distributed by individual TV stations that are themselves licensed by the FCC and need to look out for the public interest. And what's happened over the years is the power has shifted into the hands of Disney, into the hands of Comcast, such that the local TV stations feel like they've never had the ability to push back, even when they think it's in the public interest. I've heard that over the years. They've come to us and they've said, I don't want to run this particular program or that program. I don't think it fits with my obligation to serve the public interest, but I don't think I can push back. Now that changed. This is why it's a real significant win. The Kimmel episode is you had local TV stations for the very first time in probably 20 or 30 years say, we don't think this program at this point in time serves the public interest in our local community, so we're going to preempt it. But perhaps there's even more we can do to put some more meat on the bone for people as to the public interest standard. But certainly running a narrow partisan circus is not in the public interest.
That is, I think it's easier to define it by what it isn't. And running repeated ideological attacks that dominate the airwaves is not in the public interest. But I also didn't like the fairness doctrine. I hated the fairness doctrine. It kept radio and television closed off from voices like mine for decades. So how do you thread that very narrow lane between the public interest, which is legitimate, and not doing fairness doctrine manipulation?
Yeah, some of the concern about the fairness doctrine is that it ended up in its specific application back then, resulting in sort of like airline food, where it wasn't really good one way or the other. It was just bland. No one touched on controversial topics. I don't think that's the right thing, but we do want people to feel like some sort of obligation to serve the local community. I think, again, more locally originated news. Again, you get national news programming. There's not a lot of trust there, but the local TV station news that's produced, that's actually pretty trusted. And so I think we want to see more of that type of programming. And again, I think shifting that power from the national programmers, from Disney and Comcast, down to the individual TV station owner groups, down to their newsrooms, is one step in the right direction, as opposed to some of the negatives that we saw with some of previous approaches to it.
In the aftermath of the Kimmel monologue, which sparked all the controversy with Sinclair and other locally owned and operated stations, you said on a podcast, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. I understood that to mean the locals might take him off, or we're going to see the locals get a lot of comments from the public in their public diaries complaining about this. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconstruing of those words, and I guess in hindsight they were susceptible to different interpretations. Similar to your point, I mean, one of the things that I was talking about there in that interview was this concept of news distortion complaints, and we've been seeing a lot of those. And there's easy ways to deal with those news distortion complaints. People can sort of negotiate and they can handle this stuff, or there's lengthier, more time-consuming ways, which is people can actually file news distortion complaints at the FCC. And had we gotten significant news distortion complaints around the Kimmel episode, or if they'd continue to run similar programming in the aftermath of that, we would have gotten those complaints. And then we would have had to go through the lengthier regulatory process to deal with this. But in the main, the healthy way for this to happen, the easy way, the quickest way for this to happen is for the national programmers, for the local TV stations to negotiate, to work this out, and find a path forward that works for both of them. At the end, that looks like that's exactly what happened. Sinclair, Nexstar, Disney, it seems like they had productive discussions and worked this out in a way that they were able to make their own business decisions to ultimately return Kimmel to the airwaves.
Yeah, guardrails are out there. They may be invisible and they may be difficult to see in low visibility environments, but they're still out there, and performers run into them all the time. And I spent a lot of time talking today about a podcast in which Jen Psaki unwisely appeared, in which she accused Usha Vance of being the victim of domestic abuse, and it's blown up in her face because everybody's listening to everything all the time. And if you say something really repulsive, it rises to the level. But is there any way to do rulemaking to give guidance, Chairman Carr, to the local owned and operated affiliates about what does serve the public interest and what they ought to be shooting for, even if it's not mandatory, even if it's hortatory?
Yeah, we could, for sure. That's one idea that's been floated at the agencies. We could start a proceeding to take some various precedents over the years that define the public interest, put them together in a single place, refresh it. We could do that. Look, another idea that's been out there is that maybe some of these broadcast TV stations that have the public interest obligation and don't want to comply with it anymore, that we could effectively auction that spectrum. If they want to purchase it without the public interest discount, effectively, they could do that. And then their license could be just like any other license. So there's different ways forward. And maybe that's an idea that we should do is, re-auction those broadcast airwaves.
Well, one of the things that I worry about, and I always broadcast in mind, is that there might be children in the backseat of the car as mom and dad is picking them up from school. That's the time zones in which I operate mostly. Or anywhere, whatever is playing, there might be minors around. Has that self-imposed guideline vanished from the airwaves, both regulated and unregulated?
Well, I hope it hasn't. And, again, this is one reason why I've been clear from day one that we want to, reinvigorate the public interest standard and hold broadcasters accountable. Broadcast license isn't a property right. If there are, if there's nothing you could ever do that's so far beyond the pale that you lose the license, then it's not a license, then it is a property right. And so I do think we have to continue to remind broadcasters of the public interest obligation. Of course, to your point, we have, safe harbor provisions that even the broadcast content, there's certain things that you can't do during daytime hours when kids are supposed to be listening. And people may not like that, and that's okay, but they can go to Congress, they can get the public interest standard change, or they can get it removed, or we could auction the airways without it. But I do think broadcasters need to be mindful. You're not like a cable channel. You're not like a streamer. If you want to be that way, have at it. There's nothing stopping Jimmy Kimmel from going to a theater and running his program. But if that's going to be carried over the public airwaves, we have to make sure that that programming is in the public interest.
And 30 seconds, Mr. Chairman. Did you hear from the president in the aftermath of the Kimmel controversy at all?
No, I don't think we had any sort of specific conversations about that in the aftermath of it. But look, I think the agenda that we're trying to run here at the FCC is clear. We're restoring the public interest in it, but more broadly, we're looking at a Build America agenda to get this country moving again. We're doing permitting reform. We're freeing up spectrum for 5G and 6G. So I know the media focuses a lot on the media stuff. There's a lot of other good stuff we're doing too.
Yeah, keep pressing on. It is an important agenda, and I appreciate your coming back. I look forward to having you on early and often to the next 3.5 years.